What's going on, boys? Smelly Jelly here, and this is going to be volume 1 of my cult horror starter packs. This kind of derives from a common question I get from friends, family, coworkers. What do you recommend I watch? What do you suggest I kind of watch for the first time? And it's when I'm approached with this, first of all, most of the time, because people know what kind of movies I watch, so they're expecting something campy, something cheesy, something fun, not necessarily intended to scare the modern audience nowadays. And it's a tough question to answer because there's so many different subgenres to choose from, and I guess so many different countries where a film kind of originated from to choose from, and it's tough. And you also have to kind of gauge what's this person's kind of tolerance for violence in films, their tolerance for gore and blood, and I guess sleaze, for lack of a better phrase. And you really have to kind of consider all this stuff. So I want to make this kind of mini series that I'll break up into volumes to give people, easily digestible B horror movies, cult horror movies. These movies, look, in this genre, you're gonna see blood, you're gonna see gore, you're gonna see a bit of sleaze, stuff like that is usually unavoidable, but these movies are gonna be not too gratuitous and over the top. I guess so they could be ridiculous, but they're not gonna be too in your face about all that stuff. It's gonna be light, fun movies that you could watch with some friends and have a few drinks, have a few laughs. I'm gonna break them up into 3 films a pack. We're gonna have one 80s movie, one 90s movie, and then kind of a wild card era per pack. So that could be from the 70s, 60s, even earlier. Could be from the 2000s, 2010s, even recently as last couple years. It's just gonna be movies that aren't typically intended for the general audience, not typically intended to make you scared. These are movies where it's the directors were just having fun with the genre and having fun with the kind of, I guess, aesthetics of cult horror. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, for the first film ever in a cult horror starter pack for volume 1, we're going with 80s, and we're going with the quintessential horror movie, as you saw in the intro, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. If anybody asks for a B campy horror movie from me, that's the first movie I recommend. I always ask, have you seen Killer Clowns from Outer Space? It is incredible. I love the film so much, and exactly, they don't hold back. You know exactly what you're getting into based on the title alone. This film was created by the Chiodo brothers. They are kind of well known for their special effects work. They do a lot of kind of stop motion and works with animatronics, stuff like that. I'd say this is probably their most well-known work, and they actually made this film. They wrote and directed this movie. This is their baby. But in terms of the cult world, they're also known in Critters, Team America. I think they did something in RoboCop, a little bit in there. But they have done some incredible work with special effects, and you can clearly see it here. A lot of the kills are very creative and one of a kind. It's stuff that I haven't seen in other horror movies. And it's crazy because it's PG-13, so it's very easily digestible from the common audience that's just looking for a fun horror movie. And it's bright, it's colorful, it's zany, goofy. You get a lot of the weird sound effects for a lot of the kills, the clown honks and just the goofy sound effects. It's great. And I think another brilliant thing that this film does is with a lot of B horror movies, with every movie, most movies, you get the slower scenes. The scenes where not a lot's going on, and a lot of those scenes are amplified for the worse in B horror, because a lot of the times with cult horror and stuff like that, you get not so fantastic acting, and for those slower scenes it really stands out and it really makes it go on even slower. This movie, it really doesn't have any of that. It moves at a pretty brisk pace, and there's constantly something happening. It's very turn your brain off and just have some fun in terms of the speed of the movie. And clocks in at under 90 minutes, And when it does have those slower moments where people are, you know, exchanging some dialogue or, you know, kind of creeping around the circus tents and stuff like that in the movie, it doesn't happen for very long. They constantly are getting back to the action, getting back to the I guess fun and exciting aspects of the film. Anyways, yeah, that is probably the first movie I would recommend anybody give a shot if they haven't seen it. It's fun, it's zany, it's goofy. Again, you know exactly what you're in for. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I totally forgot to mention in Killer Clowns from Outer Space the soundtrack. It is so good in this movie. They even have their own theme song, and definitely if you kind of want a little sliver of this movie, just look up the theme song. It's fantastic, and it kind of really matches the tone of the film. You get a good idea just from listening to that alone on what you're in for in Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Okay, so moving on to the 90s, we're doing Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight. I have the Scream Factory Blu-ray release. I think this might be the only Blu-ray release for this movie. It is fantastic, though. This was a movie I would constantly have on as a child. I would always be watching this movie. It was kind of their entry into the theatrical world. It was Tales from the Crypt was a TV show. It was an anthology horror show based off of a comic of the same name. It had a lot of... I haven't seen much of the show. I've barely scratched the surface of the comics. But it has a lot of like gothic undertones, ghouls, zombies, at least what I could recall. You kind of see that influences in the movie. But yeah, this was part of a planned trilogy. There was Demon Knight, Bordello of Blood, and the third one, I think there might be like a third one out there that doesn't have the Tales from the Crypt name. I know Bordello didn't do as great as this movie in theaters, and I think it's okay. But anyways, I digress. This movie is basically about, we have William Sadler's character. He stole an artifact from the Collector, played by Billy Zane. He tracks him down at a kind of middle of nowhere motel, and he curses that hotel and all the other people in it, along with William Sadler's character, with a night of demons. And it is just such an incredible, like, pre-Scream era 90s horror movie. You know, it's been kind of a fascinating kind of thing I've been into recently, is I've been watching that pre-Scream era for the 90s. It's such a, like, unique and, like, gross era of horror. It's all very, like, just nasty. And again, not in a grisly way. It's just kind of like, you got a lot of, like, slimy looking blood and stuff like that. You do see that in this movie. Special effects kind of display that, like, kind of difference in quality from the 80s and the 90s in terms of, like, cult horror. You really see it in this movie. A lot of eyeballs popping, a lot of, again, that slimy blood, a lot of, you know, crazy looking, like, pretty good looking demons in this. It's great. It's fantastic. Billy Zane is absolutely incredible. He was my favorite as a kid, and he's just so funny and really witty too. Like, it's not basic humor. Like, he delivers his lines and kind of carries his performance in a very smart way. Speaking of, like, the other characters, I think everybody is pretty good and consistent in this movie. Like, I can't even think of, like, a poorly played role in this movie. Everybody does good. You had, again, William Sadler, and you had Jada Pinkett Smith in the movie. I mean, she did great. She was awesome. But yeah, this really kind of nails the feel and the aesthetic for cult horror of the 90s. It really started to shift before Scream kind of really changed the game for horror as a whole from the 80s, and it has a different feel, and you could see it, like, watching, if you were to do a double feature of Killer Clowns from Outer Space into this movie, you could see the change in just how things are portrayed and, you know, performances, and it, like, there's definitely a different, like, kind of flavor there from like 90s cult horror and 80s cult horror. And I think those two movies, if you do a double feature, you'd really see it. But it's a fantastic movie. It's a must-watch. That's my first 90s pick for cult horror. And so to wrap things up for the first cult horror starter pack with the wild card, we're doing 2000s. We're doing James Gunn's Slither. Yes, before Guardians of the Galaxy, before the upcoming Gunn DC universe that he has planned. He was originated and had his film roots in horror. He was under the wing of Lloyd Kaufman and the Troma studios. Troma was big in the 80s and 90s. They were a big kind of like cult horror studio. I think they started in the 70s, but they really amped up in the 80s. They're known for like Toxic Avenger, Class of Nuke 'Em High, a bunch of other like one-shot kind of horror films, non-franchise horror films, if you would. And I think Gunn got his start writing, producing, and acting in a couple of them. I think he wrote, his first film that he wrote was Tromeo and Juliet, a parody of Romeo and Juliet. And this was his first like kind of debut into directing with Slither. It came out in a very weird time for a movie like that to come out. As I mean, look at the box art there. This was definitely not the time for 2005 was not the time for this movie to come out, because we were just coming off the cusp of the torture era of horror that was caused by like Saw. You had a bunch of Saw clones, and then what was it, like 2003 or 4, when like that's when that started, where like every year there was a new Saw movie. That was just the beginning of it. And then after that, 2005, 2006, you had that shift towards Hollywood especially wanted to make movies that were kind of leaning towards the PG-13 crowd. You have a lot of those supernatural movies, a lot of those like, admittedly not a lot of kind of spectacle type horror movies. It was very tame movies. So this came out at a very weird time, but I appreciate Gunn sticking to his roots, sticking to his like kind of origins in the filmmaking world with this one, because there's obviously a lot of body horror, a lot of gross out horror, and that might deter some people off. I know this starter pack thing was made to kind of introduce you to some lighter B movies, but I think Slither really kind of balances everything out with not only the kind of comedic approach to it. It has some very like dark comedy elements in there. I don't want to spoil the ending, but it is a very dark but also very funny ending. It also has, obviously nowadays, has some not so fantastic CGI, a lot of that 2000s era CGI. I think that also balances it out, not only the like gross out nature of this movie, but it's balanced out by the makeup work in this movie, because there are some scenes that have a lot of solid makeup work in this movie, and stuff that one can really appreciate the kind of like time and effort it went into. So yeah, I'm gonna recommend Slither again for just being, I never watched this as a kid, but for being a weirdly nostalgic horror movie. And I think that has to do with Gunn just, again, sticking to where he came from. He wanted to make a Troma-esque movie in the mid-2000s. Weird time for that to, I guess, happen, and he did it. Anyways, that's going to wrap up my first cult horror starter pack. I don't know when I'm going to do the second one. Again, I don't want to like oversaturate this overall idea. I want to keep it to the, I guess, known but not too known outside of horror kind of cult movies. I don't want to get into like the real deep shot on video stuff for these. So I want to keep it to like the stuff you should check out if you're interested in cult horror. If you could just like, comment, and subscribe, that would be fantastic. Let's talk about these movies down below. Have you seen them? Are you going to check them out? Let me know, and we can talk movies. Anyways, thank you so much for sticking around, and I will see you boys next time.